So, reframe within, expand beyond is exactly that. We are looking within your mind, your heart, your being, and figuring out what is your story, right? And is it serving you or are you serving it? Is it holding you back or is it pushing you forward? And so, what I like to do is I like to help individuals figure out their story, figure out what role they play in the narration. What is the tone of your story, right? Are you a main character of your life or are you a supporting character of life? Is life happening to you or are you partnering with life?
Welcome to the Brainwaves podcast by Opus, where we sit down with industry leaders to unpack their journeys, explore key challenges, and talk about how they're shaping the future of behavioral health and healthcare technology. I'm your host, Sean Rickenbacker. Today, we're joined by Robyn Pendleton, a licensed clinical social worker and clinical operations leader who has built her career around culturally competent care and breaking cycles of transgenerational trauma. Robyn's work spans foster care, shelters, and community mental health, and she's now exploring how emerging fields like epigenetics and biohacking can shape the future of treatment. In this conversation, we'll talk about how her career journey, her passion for cultural context in therapy, and how science and spirituality can come together in mental health care. Robyn, again, thanks so much for joining me on the show today. To start, can you share a bit about how your early work with youth and young mothers influenced the way you practice today?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Sean. So, my work has been influenced by the youth and the mothers in the shelter because I think my first exposure really was seeing how resilience, how grace for self and others, and also the rawness of limitlessness, right, was running rampant through adolescence and youth because essentially sky's the limit, right? However, what I also realized was that's a very crucial moment, especially for young emerging adults who are coming from ideologies, morals, identity that's shaped by family and their community, and now they're determining who they're going to be for themselves. And so in those communities, right, I'm also experiencing individuals who are fighting against being shaped by the trauma that they're experiencing, by the unfortunate mishaps that they're experiencing. And what it made me realize is that I like to say that we're just all overgrown, large children. We are the manifestations of either success, resilience, imposter syndrome. These are all evolutions of an inner child that has created some sort of shell that's going to be able to move forward in life. And so I think really working with youth and with young mothers, I was able to see if we always talk to this or younger aspect of an individual, we can actually help reframe so that we do have more people that are rooted in resilience, rooted in joy, and rooted in healing.
I love that. I love that. And like you mentioned, a lot of people, if you grow up in the culture and your family members, et cetera, uh, it's really setting you up for success or failure or setting you up for however your life's going to be. We talk about it takes a village to raise a family. It takes a village to raise a child, rather. And you are the average between, the five people we spend the most time around. So you are essentially the village that you grew up in, right?
Yes.
Everything that you grew up in influences who you are as an adult.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that a lot of people are either going to try to mirror the village that was their foundation, or they're going to try to repel against it. And in that, there is trial and error. And what ends up happening is we get exposed to both beautiful things and also disastrous things. And beautiful disasters, right? Like things that we weren't expecting to work out well, but they worked out for our good anyway. And so to me, it's just very important to recognize that, yes, it takes a village to raise a child, but it also takes a village to sustain adulthood.
And we talk about that in the behavioral health community space all the time, especially with substance use treatment. It's just how important community is in recovery, community in mental health, et cetera, and just the benefits there.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I'm not too familiar with the substance use community. I didn't really do a lot of work with that demographic, so much so. However, I am aware of the importance of having a care team, both professionally and personally, right? Like we all have our homegirls, our homeboys that are like our go-to help us maintain or get through the experiences in life. And without that, I really do think that sometimes, um, we can run to the end of ourselves. And I think it's important to make sure that we are setting ourselves up um, to be connected, right? Because connectivity, I always like to say that relationships are the realest thing in life. Everything else is made up. Everything else is decided by consensus. But what is real is the connections that you have with people. And that's what keeps you grounded, and whether or not you're going to feel like you're in a simulation or whether this is going to feel like real life.
Absolutely. I love that. Relationships are the realest thing. And it's like you said, kind of we are stronger together as a community. Like
Yes.
it may not feel like it, if I've got my homeboys, my homegirls that I'm helping to support, they're also helping to support me. It feels like how
Yeah,
could we possibly be stronger together if we're all individuals? It's like we are. We've got that support,
exactly.
that group. Love that.
Exactly.
Absolutely love that. I know that we've talked a little bit about your background in transgenerational trauma. And when we spoke previously, you mentioned that that was something that you had worked a lot with and been very passionate about. Can you give more insight for the listeners?
Yeah, so transgenerational trauma for me is a vehicle for continued brokenness and for people to not be able to experience the fullness thereof of life and their potential and their purpose. And so what happens is someone might wake up and they might wake up in a broken home, and that's whether or not there's two parents or one parent, right? But then there's some sort of brokenness, whether there's brokenness in how we are thinking about things, brokenness in how we're emoting about things, brokenness from financial oppression, right? And then some people are walking out of their homes into then what is broken community, whether it is from disconnection or again, lack of resources. And so now there's this, okay, I saw this in my house. Now I see this in my community. And then at a systemic level, we can go into that there's broken systems. And so what happens is there's this reinforcement constantly that brokenness is now normalized. And I would like to shift the perception and actually say that, like, no, like something is broken and restoration
Yeah,
is a norm, or not needing to restore is not a norm, but the place that we want to get to. And so it's important to me that when I do this work, especially when I was working with adoption and foster care and young ladies in the shelter, it's important to me to not mirror brokenness, even if I myself am or exposed to brokenness in my own life. It's important for me to not mirror it, because the moment that we do not reflect that, what ends up happening is someone goes, oh, there's another pathway. I like to think about, like, say you're at an amusement park and there's like that mirror house, right? Like we don't want to run into the mirror. We want to find our way out, right?
yeah, absolutely.
We're not going to do away with the reflections, but we can start to navigate ourselves where we're not running into that reflection. And so for me, transgenerational trauma in my role in playing it to undo it is in any space that I can, not to mirror it.
I love that. And it kind of rings true, kind of hits home for me. I grew up in a broken home. It's not too uncommon, but kind of accepting that like this is the only way, this is how my
Yes.
family's always done it. People in my community, this is all I've seen. I lucked out, and I don't want to say my wife's family adopted me, but they kind of adopted me. And I see a new, better way for families to function. And that's so eye opening and so jarring. What have you done,
Yeah.
and how have you worked to help clients that you work with, patients, et cetera, to break through those transgenerational barriers?
Yeah, so it's so difficult to actually realize that, like, you can rearrange your blueprint, right? Whether it's individually or whether it's through, again, connectivity. And so one of the things that I think is super important is first helping people realize that this is inherited, not inherent, right?
Mhm.
So it's not necessarily something that you have to embody, and it's not necessarily something that you have to carry, but it is something that you are internalizing and keeping within. And so if we're able to objectify it, what ends up happening is individuals can start to reimagine what they want for their lives, right? Like we ask children all the time, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? You know, my daughter right now is saying she wants to be a giant, right?
Mhm.
Like there's just total imagination, whether the reasoning or the intellect is like, coming together. There's just total imagination. And so it's really about reconnecting individuals with that innocence of imagination that is not jaded by their current circumstance. And so, what I like to do is I like to help individuals figure out their story, figure out what role they play in the narration. What is the tone of your story, right? Are you a main character of your life or are you a supporting character of life? Is life happening to you or are you partnering with life and helping them reposition themselves in that narration and then doing a lot of reiteration? Because if we were to think about a garden, there are naturally weeds and there are naturally flowers in a wild garden. And what we can do is we can plant more weeds and we can plant more flowers. We can also try to take out weeds, but when we try to take out weeds, they like to come back with a vengeance. So it's not like, okay, we got rid of this core belief, it's never going to come back. No, you have to continue to tend to that garden. You have to continue to get to the root of that weed, eradicate it, and then replace it with more flowers and continue to prune and tend to that garden so that you're in a place where you can start to walk and believe in the change. Because, again, some of this stuff will happen and your reality will still mirror the brokenness that you're trying to get away from.
Yeah, I love that metaphor too, because with, flowers in the garden, if you are tending to it, taking care of the weeds and planting more flowers, the flowers start to propagate. And suddenly you're not fighting this uphill battle against the
Yes.
weeds the rest of your life. You've got flowers that are continuing to multiply and make your garden even more beautiful. I absolutely
Yes.
love that metaphor.
Absolutely. And also, when we can never really fully get away from weeds at all. But what ends up happening is they start to bring texture to the garden. They bring character to the garden, right? They bring story to the garden as well. And so I also think it's really important that people don't diminish or erase their story completely because it serves purpose and we can reframe our meaning from being a victim to a victor and tie ourselves to resilience versus, destruction or disaster or devastation that a lot of people do feel on a different spectrum of their emotions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you talked about, apologies if I'm paraphrasing, because in my local community, we talk about whether you are an agent to act in your life or you're an agent to be acted upon.
Yes.
I believe you said either you happen to life or life happens to you. It's just a
Yes.
matter of making the best of your situation and not just
Yes.
letting things happen. I found in my own life, if I am just letting things happen to me, I feel hopeless,
Yes.
continue to feel like things just aren't in my control. I can't
Yeah.
make a difference in my life and my community. But the second you get that momentum going, you're able
Yeah.
to make such a drastic difference with those little steps.
Yeah, and that's something that I think that a lot of people are feeling right now in the current world climate. I don't want to get too specific, but we can tend to feel that hopelessness or powerlessness, especially if we start to think too beyond ourselves, right? Like, but we have to bring it in down to the center of our own individual solar systems and figure out what can I do to make my individual day better, and then what small ripple effects can I have in the people that are immediately around me? Because then what happens is everybody, if they're the solar of their own, the center of their own solar system, everybody has satellites, everybody has planets. And so the ripple effect will happen. But we all need to first turn inward and again, figure out that narration and figure out where are you positioned in your life? Are you being acted upon? Or are you acting with?
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And it's that self-reflection that helps us to, like you said, don't pretend like there aren't any weeds. These are a big part of your story, but it's that self-reflection that helps us to understand the situation and what enables us to become better and better ourselves and our situation.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Love that. Absolutely love that. Um, we talked a little bit about that, the brokenness that people recognize in their homes and their communities. I imagine that a lot of people, once they recognize that, at least in myself, it feels like a huge sense of inferiority. Like, oh, I feel like I don't want to say raised wrong, but I felt like I was raised wrong and I missed out on those opportunities. How do you help people to recognize and overcome those internalized feelings?
Yeah, I think the key word here is internalized. And so my goal is to help us recognize our thought patterns, right? What thoughts are most like you? And what thoughts are shaped from your experience that then have circulated in your mind and now sound like you. So, what thoughts are you and what thoughts sound like you? And really being able to separate and understanding who you are outside of identity, outside of those different labels, and also who you are with those labels, right? And what purpose are they serving you? And so, again, this is still around a lot of the self narration and undoing of core beliefs that have been instilled in you, that have been created by you, and that continue to create, because core beliefs, they are majorly so during your childhood, but they do not stop once you become into adulthood. If you have some sort of magnetizing event, it can create a core belief for you, which is why I love the movie Inside Out. I just think that that's such a good depiction of that, right?
Absolutely.
And so working with individuals to recognize, hey, does this outside influence have to live within you? Or how do you tap into the strengths within you that allow you to work around the outside influence or work through the outside influence? Because again, some of the things that cause us to feel inferior are out of our control, are way bigger than us. And that heaviness makes us feel like we can't do anything about it. But the choice really to digest and accept that as radical truth really belongs to us. And we don't have to accept it that way.
Absolutely. It's all a matter of how we, like you said, internalize it.
Yes.
It's a matter of I don't want to say like a choice, but a choice to, let life happen to us, or be an agent to act,
Yeah.
let our perspectives change our
Yeah.
values.
Choice can be a little bit of a trigger word for individuals who may feel like no matter what, my immediate, my secondary, my third circumstances and atmosphere, I don't have a choice but to be this way, right? And so it's not necessarily that choice eliminates the reality. It doesn't. But choice says I have the ability to reshape the meaning of the reality in a way that translates to my emotions, my physical well being, my mental well being, and also might give me strength to figure out again in my immediate world or at a systemic level, how do I make change from my one person? Right. So, like, I worked with a whole bunch of youth. The thing that I used to say all the time was, I'm planting seeds that I may not get to see the fruition of.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
what I'm doing is I'm planting that seed, because if for one day, 10 years from then, that person remembered that, I wanted to make sure that like did my part while I was in their life. And so I think that that's what's important about navigating around internalized inferiority is it is meant to hinder you from planting seeds in your life and the lives of those around you. And so if you get to a place of like, actually, I'm going to work in my own garden. I see that there's weeds here. Maybe I'm going to sit over here and plant some daffodils. I don't know
Yeah,
names of flowers.
yeah, I get it.
Right? But that allows you to distract and redirect your energy and your focus on things that actually matter and things that make you feel good. Like we don't have to focus on things that don't make us feel good. And in this day and age, with the exposure of social media and technology, I think that we've forgotten about that because a lot of the algorithm pushes content to us. But we still do have the power of choice of what we focus on.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's like you said with the planting seeds. I know they'd say the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time to plant a tree is right now.
Yes.
And that's exactly it. Like you said with the internalized thoughts, those are meant to keep you from trying and keeping you from trying to make that progress. And some progress in any way, shape, or form is better than no progress. If you have
Yes.
to focus over here and, like you said, plant the daffodils as opposed to planting other things or weeding, etc., that's still
Yes.
progress. And we have to recognize that this is a small step and it's important for us to make those small steps.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Brick by brick. One day it'll
Yeah,
be a wall.
absolutely. Rome wasn't built in a day, right? It was built
Exactly.
brick by brick. I know we had talked a little bit on the call before that you are exploring the role of epigenetics
Mm.
in trauma. How do you see that science connecting to your work in mental health?
Yeah. So the more I look into this, the more I'm just kind of like, how do I not see this ever? Right? Because we interface with life. Like right now, it's fall season in New York. When I walk outside and the weather is cold, my body feels it and
Yep.
there's a reaction there. So that has to translate to stress, which I think studies are showing. I don't have the exact name of the study, but there's been research out there that shows that there are higher cortisol levels in descendants of individuals that have experienced the Holocaust, right? And so we have to like wonder, how does a mass genocide of a people or mass oppression of a people, how does that actually not end up embedding in the fabric of our beings? And so I think that epigenetics to me is actually starting to be the baseline in which I have to look and texturize the care that I'm giving, because I need to know, how is your community? How is your environment? How is the world in which you are soaking in through your eyes and shaping your perception? How is that translating into your physical, emotional, and mental well being or your spiritual well being, right? Because there's a lot of things where the way in which things are happening in the world right now, it's hurting people spiritually, right? Who are having compassion and empathy and wanting things to get better. And so for me, epigenetics is starting to become a pathway of not just having people talk the talk of undoing transgenerational trauma or negative experiences, but it's actually allowing them to walk that walk in true restoration that hopefully is also sustainable. Right? Versus episodic, where people can experience a lot of up and downs or relapsing or plateauing in their tapping into their purpose and their full on potential.
Absolutely. And it's so interesting. I'd never heard the study that you mentioned about cortisol levels in the descendants of Holocaust survivors. And that's so interesting to me because we had talked previously on the call about how trauma can be passed down not just from a nurture perspective, but you know, even deeper than that.
Yes, absolutely. And so I'm no scientist,
Mhm.
but epigenetics is essentially that there's a gene expression that changes, but your DNA itself doesn't change, right? Like the actual components of it. And so what does gene expression look like, right? And what does that look like on an emotional level? What does that look like in terms of how your body responds to stress? What does that look like in terms of the things that we are calling hereditary, the illnesses that certain bodies of people are more prone to? I think if we start to connect that outside of like, oh well, this is just how, like, the gene is, but more so like, well, what external influences allow that gene to thrive or be created, and what external changes suppress or redo or regenerate that cell to no longer carry that trait, right? And so it's actually really fascinating, and I am very interested in exploring and getting deeper into it and having it really inform how I deliver my care.
I think that's super awesome. And obviously, we are always looking for ways to better help patients and all that. So I think that's super awesome what you're doing, breaking into epigenetics there. One thing actually on the Brainwave show, I always feel like I'm airing out like I'm beating my rugs and I'm airing out my laundry and all this sort of stuff. But just this morning, I was thinking my wife has an anxiety disorder, which, I love her and she's great. And it's something that I've learned to be better around over the years. But I was curious this morning, I was like, what is the biological reason for anxiety? Historically, if somebody is more alert to threats, it's like a smoke alarm, it catches it
Yes.
before it's an issue. And I was like, wow, that's really awesome that that is something that we as human beings have evolved over the years. It's so, and we live in such a disconnected society from where we were previously with the advent of social media and the internet. Like
Yeah.
we've got all these factors that trigger all of these traits that might not otherwise be triggered. And so it feels
Yeah.
like all these stimulants and like pressure points are just getting activated all the time. So
Yeah, that's actually thanks so much for sharing. That's a really good point that you bring up, right? That it stems from a hypervigilance that at one point serves and I don't mean at one point in time, just in general, at one point serves purpose to keep us safe. And then what happens is that hypervigilance now overstimulated where now it's almost short circuiting and now impacting the reasoning, the emotion, the imagination of an individual that is now feeling like they're in a constant state of needing to keep themselves safe. And it's really important that when we are working with anxiety, a lot of the times what we can do with individuals is help them from catastrophizing events and those thoughts in their head and getting them to a place of understanding what's in their control and also what is a probable predictable outcome, what is a possible outcome, and also what to do in these two scenarios. And what it can do is it can create a sense of control for the uncertain moment that we are working.
yeah, it's, the closer I've been with more of these, obviously like we are all from different facets of life, but the more perspectives that I feel like I'm a part of, the more holistic view I have of the world. And I just feel like I'm more, not to, say, oh, I'm so great and so well rounded, but I feel like I'm able to have empathy and understanding of the human experience for
Yeah,
various groups.
absolutely. Absolutely.
I did want to ask, obviously, with epigenetics and the idea that this trauma changes our gene expression,
Mhm.
what kind of approach do you take as far as improving patient outcomes with that in mind?
Yeah, so when I'm thinking about patient outcomes, I am definitely coming from a space of cultural competency and being trauma informed, person centered, humanistic, and recognizing. And first, I want to pull back because cultural competency, a lot of times, is we're wanting to be aware or knowledgeable in the customs of other cultures. But for me, cultural competency is much more simpler than that, which is just I don't have to know your culture. I don't have to know the ins and outs of it, but I respect that you have a culture. And so I'm always in a student seat, even if in our work there could be the power imbalance because I'm delivering the service of care to you and not receiving it. And so when I keep that in mind, I am not just looking at scores on a PHQ-9 and a GAD-7, a PCL-5, a CITI not I'm not just looking at the numbers. The numbers are telling me a story or they're telling me the lack of a story.
Mhm.
And so I'm wanting to figure out what's happening in you and around you that's translating to this number right here. Right? And for certain communities, I'm also wanting to determine whether or not that number is suppressed, like it's actually lower than what it should be because you're normalizing things that
Mm,
actually for someone else who for all intents and purposes is on level ground would recognize as a red flag. And so it allows me to start somewhere, but numbers need to be contextualized. They need to have lived experience. They need to have a narration around it. And so I'm able to braid it together. And for some people, I am going to determine success not by just the decrease of a score, but if the score actually hikes and then decreases. Because the hiking to me tells me that you are recognizing that for you, this doesn't fly, instead of just swallowing it and being like, hey, I just need to feel okay so I can make it through. Actually, let's slow down and let's figure out that right now it's okay to not be okay and the magnitude in which you're not okay, so that we can actually not just sweep things under the rug that we'll trip under later, but that we can actually have smooth landing for us to make change and restoration
Absolutely. And
together.
it's that context, like we talked about, is so important, to the effect of, you didn't drop out of a coconut tree. You
Yeah.
are born in the context of everything around you. I know I'm misquoting it, but
Yeah.
yeah, we live in this context. It's so important to be treated in that context. We can't treat patients in a vacuum.
Yeah, we are not. I've been watching a Kablam lately, a little guilty or comfort show for me back in the day on Nickelodeon, right? We're not 2D beings on a magazine. We are 3D and we interact with our world around us. And so all of it plays a part. Like I really believe in the biopsychosocial spiritual of a person and how that translates to paper, not how paper really translates to life, although there is that bidirectional relationship. But for me, you're trying to put all of this into 9 questions, or on some exam 50. Is 50 questions sufficient to tell the fabric of someone's life? You
Absolutely
know?
not. It's so important to understand. Obviously, we can't get a holistic view of anybody's life externally, but it's so important to understand varying different facets. I love that you brought up the biopsychosocial. Something that comes up on the show all the time. Somebody brought it up like a month ago, and I've been thinking about it ever since. And the head is connected to the body.
Yes.
We can't get past that. Your mental health affects your physical health, affects your spiritual health, affects your social health, affects
Yes.
everything, and vice versa.
Yeah.
We can't treat one thing in a vacuum and expect everything else to stay exactly the same.
Yes. It reminds me of the question of what comes first, the mind or the body, which is similar to the chicken or the egg, day
Yep.
old question, right? Ancient old question. And really, I think for some people, the body does come first and it influences the mind. And for some people, the mind comes first and it influences the body. But I think either way, what's happening is there is a communication of either thought being pushed out, which again epigenetic plays a role into being like, well, then how are thoughts shaped? Right, in terms of when we are developed in the womb. And then also, how is the environment shaping for people who are body first, right? Then what is your body taking in that then is saying to your mind, create meaning out of this because I need to understand it?
Absolutely. I know on our call beforehand, you had mentioned biohacking. I'm not terribly familiar, but I'd love to get more of your perspective on biohacking and how biohacking approaches affect care and treatment.
Yeah, so you have seen biohacking, you had to have like where people are taking cold plunges, right? Like that is
Yes,
a
yes, I know
form,
what you're talking
yes,
about now. Yeah,
that is a form of biohacking. Fasting is a form of biohacking, plant-based dieting, herbal remedies, praying, meditation, breath work. These are all forms of biohacking. And a lot of people know these as lifestyle changes, coping mechanisms, hobbies or interests that they're just wanting to, optimize their experience of life, right? Like, because we're recognizing that some of us are really living on a Drake YOLO kind of life. And so they're really wanting to get the most out of it. And so biohacking to me seems like a great tool for someone we were mentioning before, right? Like the hopelessness and the powerlessness. Biohacking is a great opportunity to actually fully engage in changing experience in a way that can put you in control, because it is your individual decisions that you are making that again can be rooted to activity, can be rooted to just a simple thing of like, I'm just going to eat organic, or I'm just going to be vegan for 6 months and do restoration and regeneration at a cellular level.
yeah. I love that because it goes, like you said, with the coping mechanisms. My wife has trained me on grounding techniques to help her with
Yes.
her anxiety. And I'm like, that's exactly it.
Yes.
Obviously heard of cold plunging and all that. It rings so true and close to home for me because this is not necessarily a personal thing as in like too much information, but I've been very interested in the idea of the complete human experience. I only have the perspective that I have, and I only have the experiences that I have. And it's important, like you said, with the people who have that YOLO mentality of trying out all these different things. I think it's so important to have these diverse perspectives because I can't, not to say that I'd want to pass judgment, but I can't knock it till I try it. I
Yeah.
can't say anything is not a good idea until I tried it.
Yeah, and biohacking is like, so you were just mentioning about like, hey, I only have my one life, right? This is what it is. And for some people who might feel trapped by that concept, biohacking is like a defibrillator. It like gives you like a shock wave, right? It could be all at once or it can grow over time depending on what avenue you decide to choose in a way that can have you like, whoa, like this is my one life and it doesn't have to be the way in which I've been experiencing it. And it also doesn't have to be just for individuals who are like, wanting to restore something. It could be for individuals who are just who are traveling towards nirvana, whatever that nirvana is for someone.
Love that. I love that. And it's a lot of interesting perspectives you brought up and a lot of these cool treatment possibilities and ways to help mental health. Obviously, we have a bunch of people on the show, and I hear some people are doing surfing therapy, some people are doing like horse riding therapy. I'm like, there's so many different things to try. And it's so one thing that always comes to mind for me is it's such a local thing. Obviously we
Yes.
are in our communities, but the facility that is doing this horse riding therapy, they serve very rural farm communities. And so it's
Hmm.
very close to home. And the organizations that do surf therapy, they're on the coast. It's just so interesting how part of that therapy is becoming, I don't want to say closer to nature, but closer to nature, closer to your community, closer to these activities that are happening all around you.
Yeah, there's this connectivity theme that goes on there, right? Where we're recognizing that we're not just some single organism just passing by other organisms,
Yeah,
but that there's actually this force field and connection that we are not recognizing or sensitive or, just what is the word I'm looking for? I just had a little bit of a glitch, but we're not seeing that this is happening and then with the natural eye. And so I love that about biohacking because it brings us back to this holistic nature of the fact that while trauma may not be inherent, right, resiliency is.
absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. I love that. Robin, thanks so much for your time today. The conversation is not nearly over, but it's been fantastic having you on. I think you've got great perspectives. I did want to ask because I'm curious. I know I said that I wasn't going to ask about this necessarily, but I've got here that your tagline is reframe within, expand beyond. Tell me more about that.
Thanks. I've been having such a great time with you, Sean. So, reframe within, expand beyond is exactly that. We are looking within your mind, your heart, your being, and figuring out what is your story, right? And is it serving you or are you serving it? Is it holding you back or is it pushing you forward? And being able to then materialize that into your everyday life to reach your goals, to reach your potential, to reach whatever you consider is the top shelf of your life. And so my work is really surrounded in helping people understand their base identity through core belief, determining whether or not they want to hold on to those core beliefs, and then working together to recreate meaning. So, Sean, you did a lot of sharing here, and so I will disclose this really for me came about after almost a decade ago. I was subject to domestic violence, and so I would be considered a domestic violence survivor. To me, that identity was just something that did not serve me. It actually really made me feel powerless, and so I had to do a lot of work to reframe that experience and attach myself to a different meaning that allowed me to move beyond that experience and no longer have it being something that's on my portfolio, but also it's still in my book of life. It's still in my resume. I can pull it out so that people understand that I can relate to them. I can have empathy and sympathy and compassion at a more personal level. But I needed to look inward and help myself understand, was that the message that I wanted to bring into my future? And from shifting from that, I was able to really make leaps and bounds into accomplishing goals that I had shelved, familiarizing myself with myself and getting to know who I was and who I've always been and who I wanted to be. And so that's what my work is when we're doing Reframe Within and Expand Beyond. We are looking in and we are figuring out, hey, let's actually re-narrate your story, whatever part that it is that you want to fix. And from there, now let's live that out.
Absolutely. I love that. I love that. And thanks so much, Robyn, for sharing. And I understand that that might not be something you always share. So I appreciate the insight. And it goes back to what you said. This is one of the weeds. This is one of the things that makes you who you are. This isn't something we need to repress and push down, but
Yeah,
embrace and understand this is who I am. This is why I am the way that I am. Here's how I move forward.
exactly. It's no longer just a sore of an eye in my garden. It's now something that plays a role into how beautiful I've made it.
Absolutely. I love that. I absolutely love that, Robyn. One last question.
Yeah.
I always ask this. Do you have any book recommendations?
Oh, any book recommendations? So, interestingly enough, I am probably going to reacquaint myself with the compound effect. I do not have the author right here. I wasn't prepared. I don't have the
I
author's name.
think I've read that one. Let me see.
Yeah.
Compound Effect. Is that by Darren Hardy?
Yes, it is. It's along the lines of what we've been talking about, brick by brick, and really making small changes that, capitalize over time. I would say that is a good book to read. I also would say Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome by Joy DeGruy is a great book to read, especially if you're wanting to learn more about transgenerational trauma. For folks who are out here that are dabbling in faith, I am also liking the book called Unraveling. And I believe, let me see what her name is.
Is that Peggy Orenstein?
No, hold on. Let me get her name. I believe I have it as an audiobook in my phone, so that would be great. It is by Deanna Lorea. She's just an individual who is like, putting content out on social media about how, she also was coming to the end of herself and working on recreating meaning. And so I would recommend those 3 books for sure.
I love that. Thank you. And I'm a huge reader. Obviously, I've read Compound Effect. We'll have to check out the other ones. So,
Yes, yes. Start with Joy DeGruy. That's a really great one.
okay. Awesome. Will do. And thanks so much, Robyn, for your time. It's been fantastic having you on Brainwaves. I think you've got a lot of great insights that our audience will love.
Thanks so much, Sean. It's a pleasure to be here.